Okay. Hello, everybody. Lalitha and I are back again. And Lalitha, I'm going to ask, we're going to talk a lot about the nakshatras tonight. But this is mostly going to be featuring Lalitha more so than myself.
No, no, no.
Uh, but
I
uh,
don't think.
but but I I want to ask you, Lalitha. How do you use, so there are a variety of ways to use nakshatras, and for those of you who don't know, nakshatras are the little lunar mansions that surround the zodiac, that are sort of like a zodiac within a zodiac. So you have the 12 signs, and then you have 27 or 28 nakshatras. So Lalisa is going to give an explanation of the variety of ways you can use the nakshatras to interpret a chart. So
Great.
I'm going to give it to you, Lalisa.
Hi, Gary. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited about this topic because it has changed my life in so many ways. And similarly, it has changed the lives of my students, my clients, and of course, my family members who were the first to hear about this as I was learning 10, 15 years ago when I was, like tentative and a beginner. So I like to talk about nakshatras in a way that is more approachable for everyone. And rather than telling you, I like to show you a little bit of how it works. So as Gary said, that there are these 27. Today we use only 27 nakshatras or constellations along the ecliptic, which is the invisible path of the sun that we don't see but exists. It's very real. So in these 27 constellations used to be 28, but we're going to skip the 28th for today because I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information, um, too many notions to remember. So I like to make it simple. And I will talk probably about 4 nakshatras today. Maybe next week we can do some others from the other side of the zodiac. So why am I saying that? Because every nakshatra is a world. It's really like a galaxy if you think about it. So most constellations have more than one star. For example, Bharani has 3 stars, and it's fully in Aries. And other nakshatras like Chitra is only 1 star, the brightest, the diamond shaped, if you will, like that's their symbol. All right, so let me tell you about the 4 nakshatra I want to talk about. So to make it simple, so you can use your nakshatra. The first thing I invite you to do is something very simple. Find out your nakshatra from your Vedic astrologer, from Gary or from me or another astrologer, and then just fall in love with it. Guess what? What's going to happen? You'll fall in love with what huge part of who you really are at the subconscious level and the thoughts that are running your life. Let me say that again. The thoughts that are running your life, because we don't really realize what our karmas are. And maybe we'll see some patterns, and maybe we forget, and one thing happens that makes you happy, pleases you, so you forget about your karma, but then it comes back, right? So once you find out your nakshatra, just do a Google search, nothing fancy. Don't even go to the classics because sometimes they need a little bit of training for you to understand the classical texts like the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra or the Jataka Parijata, the Paradipika. These are very serious texts. Same with Brihat Jataka. And, and you need a little bit of knowledge, to understand what these rishis were talking about. Whereas if you do a Google search, anybody can do it, right? So find out the name of your nakshatra and then do a search on that name, not just from the astronomical point of view, but from the original point of view. And why do I say that? Because the rishis gave us the spiritual science of Vedic astrology, Jyotish, the science of light. Whereas astronomy came later, it was more like the material science. But they were very proficient in both. So they knew where the nakshatras were. Maybe they called the nakshatra something else. And if I understand well, NASA uses the Sanskrit names for these constellations. Because once I was doing a search about a nakshatra and said, it is formally called Kritika. I was like, what? Just as we do, we astrologers. And I was very excited about that. Then somewhere else I read that NASA also uses Sanskrit. To me, that was mind-blowing. I thought, so there is relevance, right? For this perfect language, which is Sanskrit. It's used currently in astronomy, and it helps even at the mathematical level in so many ways. I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to skip that part. But so find out your nakshatra. Let's say your nakshatra is Hasta in Virgo. So find out who's the archetype. And the archetype means the deity. So there is a huge gap today between the spiritual world and the scientific, right, Gary? Would you say that?
Yeah, yes, I definitely would. The scientific world essentially tends to discount most spiritual traditions as, although there have been some people who've been interested in it. But most scientists tend to discount it almost entirely out of hand.
Yes, totally. There's no bridge almost, but you can find a bridge very easily. For example, a tip I give to my students in my Bliss Lab program, which is the coaching program through astrology, I always tell them, go and read that book that my guru told me to read like years ago, I think 5 years ago. It's called How God Changes Your Brain. And that was mind-blowing because once you understand that even scientists, so it's written by a medical doctor, Dr. Andrew Newberg, and by a PhD neuroscientist. They're both neuroscientists. So they figured out that once you look at a picture through tests, etc., studies, etc., that once you look at the picture, say, for example, here, let me give you this picture of Ganesha and Vyasa, right? I like to keep pictures of archetypes all over. I don't know. It's a little shiny, so I don't know if you can see this.
Let me see if I can change the image so you're bigger. Yes, yep, you can see them.
That a little bit.
Yep, you can see them.
All right, it's a little shiny, but
Yep.
All right. So once you look at a picture of, say, Ganesha, your brain will change. Your feelings will change. Your understanding will change. You'll become more relaxed, more compassionate. So it's a higher intelligence overall. And we have neglected that, especially when we talk about idolatry, this fear we have of being duped by the old, by the traditions. We don't want to mess with them. We want to be new and we want to be independent, but we are neglecting huge chunks of our psyche, huge chunks of our who we really are. And the subconscious mind has so much to offer. For example, we cannot even tackle today. We don't understand it. Whereas the rishis, the yogis understood all this very well. So find out your deity. I'll give you some examples. So I'm going to talk about Bharani, Kritika, Uttara Palguni, and Vishaka. So 4 nakshatras tonight, 4 constellations. For example, let's start with Bharani. Right? Every nakshatra is very different. And sometimes it's fully in one sign, and sometimes it's partially in the next sign. So I will explain what that means. But let's talk about Bharani. Everybody loves to say bad things about Bharani. Actually, in India, it's considered the star that will rule the whole world. And it means several things, not literally. We're not dictators. I am a Bharani star. And so I was very sensitive to this. I noticed that there were books, multiple books written to bad mouth, or at least to talk very badly about Bharani. And I believe that's a modern thing we're doing. So we project. And also we find an enemy or some problems, right? We're in Kali Yuga. So we're kind of confused. So I found 3 books on Bharani that were horrific. And none of it resonated with my family, myself, and other people I know who are Bharani. Like, for example, is Carl Jung, pronounced Young in America, the great psychologist, he was a very introverted but brilliant person, right? He would say, to me, talking is a torment. And even though I'm very introverted, I've always had a career somewhat in public speaking, even before I became an astrologer. And I thought, yes, I feel that because I love people. I want to help. I want to communicate. I'm more like Pisces too. And so I have that. But how come that I really hate when I talk too much and I feel drained and kind of tired, and I want to help people, but not by talking for 7 hours straight. Whereas somebody like Gary, who's a Gemini, will love the talking itself. It's a pleasure. It's a way to reaching crowds and people, right? So I love to reach crowds, but it's Bharani stars are usually very successful in public life. But why did they write so many negative things? Oh, they're doomed, their mother would be horrible to them. A lot of inspiration in my life came from my mother, for example, but I don't want to talk about myself. Let's talk about this nakshatra and why it was bad-mouthed. I believe that in Kali Yuga, there's a big misunderstanding about women and the divine feminine, which is now finally coming back. So now a lot of people like to talk about the path of the goddess, and they're comfortable. It's becoming more comfortable. So also, Gary, you know that in India, the goddess is more powerful in that culture, in the wisdom traditions of Asia, for example, in the
Yeah.
Oriental traditions, the goddess has all the powers. So that was before Kali Yuga. All this
Yeah.
happened when
I,
we were
I,
real
I,
smart.
I've also seen. I can interrupt you just for 1 second.
Oh, good.
There seems to be a lot of, I won't say hatred, but dislike or misunderstanding of Venus overall as a planet.
Yes, yes.
And Venus essentially is, it's not really the ruling planet, but it's the
Mhm.
deity associated with botany.
Yes,
And and so Venus is vilified as the guru of the Asuras or the demons.
exactly.
And it's really not,
Demons,
it's
it's
not as
right.
straightforward as that.
Mhm. Right.
So you'll see a lot of folks, and I agree with your comment uh, about about the goddess, but a lot of folks just won't like Blarney also because it's associated in part with Venus.
And Yama, right?
And
So
yeah,
what is Yama? Yama is the great equalizer. So everybody is the god of death and also of justice. Is Dharma Raja. So is the king of Dharma, is the god of Dharma. Dharma means righteousness, means duty, means justice. So all these amazing things. So why are we so afraid of that when actually we all love justice? We all want to become enlightened, at least in this field of spirituality, and or at least we don't hate the idea of enlightenment. How's that? So even though your path in this life is not to become enlightened, still eventually you will, right? So moksha is a reality. So and it's very much at the core of Vedic astrology. So this path, like even the Purusharthas, right? The four goals of life. One is money, wealth, and Bharani is a artha. So it's for wealth and prosperity and also practicality. And then comes the other path, which is kama, so the pleasure, having a family, a partner, enjoying life, good food and prosperity and all this pleasure, right? After pleasure, people say, okay, enough of that. Now I want some meaning, right? And maybe they want dharma and they start looking into it and they say, actually, we're born as dharmic people. At birth, dharma is very dominant because the child is pure, is omniscient, and then the brain changes and it loses all those neurons, forgets the past lives, etc. So that's my research. And then comes moksha. Without moksha, we become very arrogant. I mean, we live forever. I want everything. I want to be the boss, right? So we do need that kind of humility of knowing, okay, Yama will be the great equalizer. He will give us a great time. He will not do us wrong. But when the time comes, you have to leave. I mean, come on, how long do you want to live? And you can live up to 120 years. All right, then if you worship Yama, you get justice. Things will be returned to you that were taken in maybe in a fraudulent way. So it is a great archetype to worship. And you can go and Google is uh, mantra and also myth if you like, because myths really change your brain. They change the way you see yourself and the way you live. So after saying
True.
that, right, it's been your experience.
Yes, very true.
Yes. So remember that all the gods have one great role. They bring virtue to the earth plane. So whether you want to believe them as literally as angels and deities and aspects of God, which is my favorite way of interpreting them, you can also believe them in a more secular way, like archetypes. These are thought forms that have been in the collective unconscious for thousands of years, if not longer, right? So when you worship or at least you pay attention to an archetype, like, okay, let's go back to the same one. I also like to have my statue of Ganesha with me. So once you pay attention to Ganesha, or these can be Lakshmi, or it can be Yama, it can be another deity, what happens? You become like that being. You get help from that being. So once you write down your nakshatra, find out the deity. Next, find out the lord of that nakshatra. The lord means the planet that rules that nakshatra. In case of Bharani is Venus. So Venus, what happens with Venus ruling this nakshatra? There's a lot of creativity, there's artistic sense, and a lot of Bharani people, they're good in a career in writing. All these gifts given by Venus, of course, come with some responsibility that you don't, hopefully Bharani will not get out of control with this. But Venus is a Brahmin planet. So don't think of Venus just as a Rakshasa ruler. He's not just the god of the demons, he's also a Brahmin in his own right. So I say he's because he's a male in the Vedic system. All right, so all those books about hating Bharani. Bharani is the womb of the goddess. It's also the reproductive organ of the female, human female. So it means bearing a fetus to completion. So don't we want that birth? So it's really the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. So that's very important to remember when you judge a Bharani star, whether you're a student or whether that's your nakshatra. So please don't rush to conclusion, just go deeper. This is one of the most misunderstood nakshatras of all, according to also Vedic astrology texts, etc. So go a little bit deeper. All the gods, all the nakshatras are divine. Next, I want to talk about is another favorite, Kritika. I love Kritika. It's fierce. Actually, more than fierce, I'd say, okay, Bharani is fierce because it's really not just for having fun. It's really a lot of responsibility and work. And Bharani people work very, very hard. They're overworked, overburdened, in fact. And so Kritika is more sharp. It has this sharp nature. And in fact, the symbol is a razor. And what happens with Kritika? They're very successful people. Sometimes they sound arrogant because who is the Lord of Kritika? Is the sun, and the sun is the ruler, right? Number one. He's the planet of the kings and the rulers, the politicians, etc. All those who have power. All right, so Kritika sounds a little like that, but they're really talented people. And there's one, as it enters into Taurus, that's where the moon becomes exalted. So imagine there's also a lot of gift from Venus in this nakshatra because Taurus is ruled by Venus. So it goes from Aries, Mars, into Venus, sign of Taurus. So they're very much karma oriented. They want to enjoy life, but they still have like the responsible people that they want to achieve things, that they want to help others. So they're pretty much righteous people. All right, so the other nakshatra that I love, it's Uttara Palguni. And I don't know if you've read the Ramayana, Gary, I'm sure you have, but most people in the West don't hear about the Ramayana. And I think that our life and education cannot be complete unless we have studied the Ramayana, because it's really the story of life, even as it is today. There is a race of demons who is troubling the human beings and trying to get power. They eat flesh, they eat humans, a lot of things that happened at that time. And then the devas, the gods, were called on by goddess Bhumi. She is the mother goddess, the earth goddess. Right? So she was panicking. All these Rakshasas had so much power, especially one called Ravana. So the goddess ran to Vishnu and cried and said, please help me. I'm in big trouble. And this guy is getting so much power and is eating humans, is stopping the fire rituals that the rishis were performing. So the consciousness was dropping on the earth plane very quickly. So now don't fear, because of the interaction of good and evil has always existed. And that's the divine design. So, but at that time, the consciousness was dropping. It was Silver Yuga, right? Treta Yuga. So Vishnu said, no worries, I'll come back as a human and I will fix that. I will fix that guy. So he was born as a prince in a royal family of the Sun dynasty. And why was Uttara Palguni mentioned almost in every chapter of the Ramayana? Because Uttara Palguni is ruled by the sun. And that's when all the royal kings, in the Sun dynasty, so like the Raghu, for example, which was Rama's family, that's when they use this time to perform their coronations, their marriages, to start a war. So it's really a nakshatra of patronage. So if you want to contact a VIP, hopefully that's a good nakshatra for you, you want to use that time window. And it doesn't last very long, because in Leo that lasts a little bit longer. And the sun is very strong in Uttara Palguni, because imagine Leo, right? Yep. Sun, ruled by the sun, is the Lord, and also this nakshatra of the sun. So remember, when the planets enter a nakshatra, they become almost like the planet ruling that nakshatra. So Bharani will be good-looking people usually. Okay, usually. Some people in the fourth pada, they're more stocky, they're more masculine because it's Mars. But Kritika will be very royal and they're carrying themselves because of the sun. And now we have Uttara Palguni, which is a very much royal nakshatra. So we will see people are dignified, they speak very nicely, they have good manners, they care about tradition, etc. Right? Is that?
Yes. Yep. And I just wanted to mention the story of Ravana is also interesting, because it's and one student of mine had mentioned this to me. He said it seems like all the demons or the bad guys obtain power by following the prescribed rituals. They don't
yes, exactly. They don't
break the rules.
They don't break the rules. They follow the rules.
They follow. Yep. But as you said, something gets out of balance and it has to be fixed. And that's when Vishnu gets involved to preserve, because his mission is to preserve life.
Yes, right. Yeah. So Vishnu preserves life on the earth plane. And right now we see that sometimes it seems on some days and with some events, especially 2020, that their consciousness has reached an all-time low. So that's actually no panicking. That's not a time to panic. It means that now the dawn is coming. So that's that means that the new age, not the new age, sorry, I don't mean that one belief system. I mean, really like a golden age, a time when the truth returns, and there's an interest in these texts already, and a lot of people are studying Vedic astrology like never before in modern times. Sure. So that makes me very excited. Intuitively, I always felt it was a great path. I've been studying it since 1993. So it's a lot of years. It says a lot about my age. But regarding this nakshatra, Uttara Palguni, so it is a star where you get help from the from VIPs. If you need help, if you need to write a proposal, you may want to use that time window if it's a good time for you, for your moon. So it would be good for everyone except maybe for, let me think. It's too long to explain. I don't want to confuse you, but just to find out through a Vedic astrology consultation which are the power times for you. So some nakshatras will be better for you because there's this chart that we use in Vedic, the Tarabala, that depending on which nakshatra your moon is, that's how you choose your power times. Also depending on the sign of the moon. So for some people, that's a bad house, right? If the moon is in the 8th house, you like Aquarius people, Virgo becomes their 8th house. So don't do anything. Aquarius moon people don't use that when the nakshatra is in Virgo. But when it's in Leo, you can use it and it's very favorable. It's the moon in the 7th house, which is just perfect. Okay. Having said that, so the war against Ravana happened or began actually on Uttara Palguni. Even Rama's marriage happened on Uttara Palguni, but then there was a trick. The gods didn't want him to be happy in his marriage, otherwise he would have sat in his palace happily ever after, but they wanted him to go in exile because he had to kill all these demons. Okay, Ravana was not a total beast. I mean, he made a lot of horrible mistakes. He was very egoistic, and that usually is the downfall of people because ego destroys. But he was a Jnani, he was very intelligent, and he was very well versed in the Vedas, but he misused that knowledge. So similarly, when you get all this information about your nakshatra, etc., so make sure you use this information for good. It never helps to try to use it against someone or even to get justice. Just pray to Yama and you will get justice. You can also get longevity by worshipping Yama, for example. If you worship Aryaman, I wanted to talk about Aryaman, that governs Uttara Palguni, is the deity archetype. So you can invoke him with his name. No need to look for fancy mantras. Even I don't think I have a mantra for him. You just ask in your own words. With humility and love, you can reach anything. So just say that you need this help. Please help me and thank you. And I promise to use it for good. That's all is needed. That's when God listens, whether it's an angel or God, they listen. The other nakshatra, real quick, so I want to hear more about Gary, what he has to say. And so Vishaka is another one of my favorite. It's supposed to be a Rakshasa nakshatra, but actually there's a lot of Dharma in Vishaka. Why do I say that? Because it's ruled by Jupiter, that's the lord of Vishaka. And it's a very powerful nakshatra. Oh, I forgot to say the deities of Kritika. Okay, I'll talk about it in a minute. So Vishaka is ruled by Indra, the king of the gods. Is also considered a demigod by some traditions, like the Tamil Siddhas consider him a demigod. And worshipping Indra gives you a lot of power, obviously, and also wealth. And also Agni. What is Agni? It's so pure. Of course, it can burn you, but if you use it correctly, you can eat, you can warm yourself up in your house. There's a lot of good in the fire. And the fire is very pure. It always goes up. You've noticed that. My guru talked about this, how the fire came from another galaxy and always rises up to the heavens. It never goes down. So it's very powerful. And if you worship Agni, you get a beautiful body, like beautiful and radiant and like very well-balanced body. And the other archetype I like to talk about that many people don't know about, it's Vishaka is associated with the Pleiadian god Muruga, and so is Kritika. Kritika makes more sense because it's in the Pleiades, right? Star cluster. But Vishaka is also associated with Muruga. And in fact, there is a festival in India, on a certain Vishaka day that when Muruga is worshipped everywhere in Tamil Nadu and South India. So Vishaka is a lot of spiritual power, but also good material knowledge that they can accomplish, they can do things in this world. So it's a well-balanced star that they reach their material and spiritual goals. Ideally, they want to shift more to the spiritual because otherwise they're too ambitious. They can get lost a little bit. And Jupiter doesn't like that. Jupiter is very balanced. Yes, he brings good fortune, but also really look up at the sky, space, right? Jupiter rules space. So once you do that, you get the blessings of this nakshatra, and you still reach your goals without getting lost in the material. When it's excessive, it's kind of stifling for your soul, and you get depressed because it's never enough. Even billionaires want more money, trillionaires, same thing. So you can never be totally happy that way. All right, so I want to ask now, I'm very curious to hear what Gary has to say about the Dasha system. Why am I saying that? Because the nakshatras are very much associated with the beginning of a Dasha. So if you, depending on the degrees of your moon, for example, and the nakshatra of the moon, you begin a certain Dasha period, which means the major period of the planet that completely takes over your consciousness. And that has so much power because the planet will bring you thought forms and pretty much you become almost like that planet. So if it's Saturn, watch out. Those thoughts may be very pessimistic. If it's Venus, also watch out because you may get carried away with pleasures. Okay, but I want to hear more about what Gary has to say.
All right, that was an excellent analysis. Thank you very much, Lalitha. That was wonderful. I learned some things from that. Okay, but I have a few planets in those nakshatras, so
which one?
Jupiter's in Critica,
Fantastic.
and Mercury's in Hasta. Mercury and Sun.
That's fantastic. That's exalted. Right.
Yeah. So but I think one of the things that paying attention to the deities, I think, is really important because that's, there's a section in Brihaparasha or Shastra that talks about the incarnations of Vishnu through the planets, and I think that's, personally, I think that's one of the most important sections for an astrologer to study, because then he gets a better he or she gets a better understanding of the nature of the planet. So Venus isn't just this,
absolutely,
this wilting beauty who's all starry-eyed and in love at all times. It's a Vishnu incarnated as essentially the strongest warrior on the planet, through Venus and Parashurama, and there are hints about
and
that.
It was dangerous too. The fiercest of all the kings were like, oh my God.
And Parashurama came to purify the Kshatriya caste.
Yes. The Kshatriyas were really shaking in their boots.
Yes. So, but there's also a lesson about that. Just to digress just for a second, there's also a lesson in that in Venus, Parashurama is asked to do a series of acts which will even hurt him emotionally, acts which will actually hurt his family. And he does them without question. And then then for a boon, he's asked, "What do you want?" He said, "Bring these people back to life."
Oh, I don't know that. I didn't know that. I forgot.
Yes,
but I know he asked Rama to remove his anger.
Yeah. Yes.
Very destructive.
Well, Jamaigini, his father was a guru of a group, and he had a wish fulfilling cow, and the Rakshasa stole the cow, but and he really took off after the Rakshasas. Number one, to reclaim his cow, and number two, to avenge his father's death. But his father had also asked him to kill his mother and also his other family members, who would not kill the mother because the mother had an impure thought. And Parashurama did it right away. That was his father. That was his guru. He did it without question. But and he said, okay, I can give you whatever boon you like. He said, just bring them back to life.
Yes. So
Okay.
he, of course, he was Vishnu. He was never really evil, but he
Yeah,
did. Yeah, he followed up.
yeah. But I think there's sort of an important concept here, because essentially when you're looking at Venus, what is love connected to? Love is connected to sacrifice. It's compromise. It's not necessarily doing
Compromise.
not necessarily doing what you want all the time.
Right.
Okay, sometimes it's doing what you have to do.
Yeah.
So even though it's a rather brutal story, it also gives an idea of the nature of the planet, which is more. If someone truly loves someone, they will give up their entire life for that person or for that thing.
It
So
is a transactional love, as you said,
yeah,
because it's like I make you happy, and so you make me happy. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
an exchange, but there's a lot of compromising and sacrifice.
yeah. But
Uh,
but you
that,
but you
that
but you got but you can also bring that into the arts as well. So the arts require that kind of self-sacrifice, that kind of total dedication. So, and again, Venus does have to have a connection with value, but it's also connected with, as you said, in Varani, the yoni and the creation of life. And whatever life is created also has to end after it's lived its illusion, right? After it's gone through whatever it needs to experience. So we come into Earth, everything that's born must die. Okay, so essentially, that's a critical stage in a person's evolution, because if we go, and one of the theories is that we reincarnate because we haven't detached sufficiently enough from our desires, or we haven't seen our desires fulfilled enough. And even in Autobiography of a Yogi, one of the I think Lahiri Mahasaya came back, and his sole wish was to see a golden temple devoted, and it seemed like such
a big
yeah,
diamond palace or something like that, right?
yeah,
Like a big
yeah,
palace full of
yeah,
gold and gems. Yeah.
yeah. But devoted to God, not devoted, not for him, but he just wants to see that. But so he reincarnated in order to see that. So it isn't always necessarily the idea that, oh, I didn't win that election, I'm going to come back and I'm going to win that election this time, or I didn't get that girl, I'm going to come back and get that girl or that guy. It's also these other types of
Hopefully not.
these other types of desires. So I'm going to switch from that into talking about a little bit about the nakshatras, because this is, and I can connect like weird points in time pretty easily. Uh, basically, basically, as you said, the nakshatras are what's rising. So we have a rising nakshatra when we're born. We also have a moon nakshatra when we're born, and the moon is our mind. This is where the mind is when we're born, and this is what the mind wants to experience when we're in life. So the mind wants to experience a sequence of activity. So if a person was born during a Rahu nakshatra, as I was, I was one of those lucky people born during a Rahu nakshatra.
I like
Basically,
them. I like them. No problem. A slash, no, that's Mercury. I like Swati very much.
yeah, but 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 essentially the pattern of the person's life. So you're looking at the pattern of the person's life is judged from the nakshatra Lord. Okay, and there has to be a qualifier here, because there are an abundant number of nakshatra sequences. So Yogini has a different sequence than Vimshotri does and Ashotri does, but Vimshotri is the most commonly used, so we'll use that as a reference point. And there's a certain sequence of Ketu, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, as the dasha sequence for all the planets. Well, that's true, but there's also a sequence which is determined by where your moon is at birth. So it doesn't necessarily mean, so let's say if a person has a strong Mercury, let's say that Mercury's in Gemini, but they were born in Aquarius, their Mercury Mahadasha isn't going to necessarily touch on the topics associated with Gemini. It'll touch upon the topics associated with Revati, because that's the sequence they were born into. So they may be really smart about spiritual things or about
I like what you're
renunciation.
doing. Sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I
Yeah,
like
sure.
how you're going in this sequence. Yeah, very much.
Okay, so essentially, so even if you have, let's say, so that explains why certain people who have really strong Mahadasha sequences, sometimes they can seem to fail, because the Mahadasha sequence may be leading them into directions in which the Mahadasha Lord would actually be debilitated if the Mahadasha Lord were placed in that sign, or they would be in topic areas that would not benefit from the energy of the Mahadasha Lord. And I'm using failure, or they'll emphasize different things. So like a Bill Gates will emphasize wealth over another person who will emphasize spirituality. I'm not saying Bill Gates is an unspiritual person, but you get the point that I'm getting to. So certain people will have, so that sequence that the moon starts off with is essentially the sequence of life for that person. And so you can have people, quote unquote, being spiritual very early in life and then losing interest in it later on in life, and vice versa, being very materialistic early in life and becoming more spiritual later in life based upon their Mahadasha sequence. And sometimes you'll see even the Mahadasha well placed in a sign, and it looks like the person's headed for worldly success, and then all of a sudden they take a U-turn and they just go like, nope. In my Mercury Mahadasha, I just use my example. In my Mercury Mahadasha, I'm going to study Jyotish and spirituality, not become a lawyer. Okay, so that's so essentially, and you'll have a lot of people saying to themselves, "Well, let's say I was born in Cancer. So let's say I was in Ashlesha moon. Ashlesha is another nakshatra which has a really bad rap.
It's not fair.
Yeah,
It's ruled by the Naga, so sometimes you think, okay, it's associated with Rahu and Ketu.
yeah.
Really, but it's really a very intellectual, intelligent nakshatra, which I like actually. Yeah.
So essentially, the dasha starts with Mercury. That person will be very, very much attuned to spiritual life early on in life, because they'll be towards the end of the nakshatra, towards the end of Cancer, and the subsequent Mahadashas will push them into more even Ketu will push them into more financial interests. Venus will push them even further into more financial interests, and Sun will push them even more. By the time they hit Moon, though, Moon will be in Virgo, so it'll be a little bit tougher for them. That Mahadasha will be a little bit tougher for them.
Because they're not friends?
Yeah, and also because they're not, Moon in Virgo tends to overthink and worry a lot.
I have a son like that.
Yeah.
He's very bright, but he's always worried.
So even if the person's moon is in Taurus in an exalted position, that person will still feel anxious during that Mahadasha. Obviously, it'll be affected but there's essentially, so this is what I would call a progressed interpretation of the beginning of the Mahadasha. Also, and I think we touched on this last week, you also want to look and see what the beginning of the Mahadasha is, the planets look like. But that driving, the psychological drive for that person is more connected with what's going on with the nakshatra that their planet rules than where their planet is placed. So there'll be a very large component of, so let's say if they're in a sequence which goes from, let's say, a 6th house to an 8th house, so you'll go through several nakshatras which go from 6th house to 8th house. that eighth house Mahadasha may be tough in terms of the person feeling closed in or imprisoned, but
Or
it
they
may,
will lose a lot of material things and
means,
then be crushed for some time with some
yeah,
depression or
but-
stress
yeah, but they may also
individually.
get into the more occulty sides of spirituality. So
Sometimes too
so,
much.
but that's not really such a bad thing, because that has to do with Kundalini arousal. That has to do with, if it's handled correctly, that has to do with Kundalini
Depends,
arousal.
right? It
It's all
depends.
it's
Like
all
Jupiter in the air, I've never seen great results in my
yeah. Oh no, I'd agree, because
depends on
Jupiter.
the dharmic level
Yeah,
of the
yep,
chart.
yep,
Otherwise,
yeah,
they can get into magic and other weird
yep,
things, and then
yep,
it can
yep,
get out of control. Yeah.
yep, yep, exactly. So that's it. So that's the hidden secrets. Jupiter doesn't like being in that house for a variety of reasons. It's more connected with planets like Mars and Venus, to be truthful. But but ba- but basically, eighth house can have some benefits, because you can learn a lot of
Absolutely.
secrets. You
Venus
can
and
learn,
Mercury are okay in the eighth house,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
in my experience. Yeah.
yeah, yes. So essentially, the planets which are less, so Jupiter's also, I'm glad you mentioned Jupiter, because Jupiter's um Angiras, yeah, another one of Jupiter's names is Angiras, and he's the son of Agni. Okay, so he's a son of fire, basically. So so Jupiter has that natural lordship of Sagittarius and Pisces. So Jupiter can actually be, at times, can actually be warlike.
In Sagittarius, yeah, definitely.
Yes, yes, yeah,
Kshatriya, right?
yeah. So the art of war in India was the Danu Veda, right? Okay, Danus is Sagittarius' name. It's the arrow, right? So
Yeah,
it
I
doesn't.
think
Yeah,
Hitler had Jupiter there. We're
yeah,
not so
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
He
definitely.
did, right?
Yeah. He definitely did. So Jupiter, depending on the placement in the chart, all planets are capable of good and bad traits, right? But basically, I think what I'm trying to say is, the Nakshatra sequence essentially sets the sequence for the life. The area or emphasis you'll be interested in is actually set by the Nakshatra sequence, much more so than by where the planet is placed. So, I've tested this out, and it seems to be, at least psychologically, that's where the person is. So let's say if Mercury's in Revati, they may study like everything they can about spirituality. I mean,
But
literally
then
every.
never accomplish the goal of that study.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah,
was studying this chart, to give you a quick example, you're absolutely correct. Somebody who had a very intelligent birth chart and a lot of money, a billionaire, a woman, was writing her book for 10 years. Now, I'm sure she had ghostwriters, she had plenty of help, plenty of editors she could have reached. She never finished the book. And that's typical of Mercury, very intelligent Mercury, but will be spinning its wheels,
yeah,
right? Yeah, I agree with you.
yeah. So I think when you look at, if you can look at that, I mean, that won't make the entire chart, but if you can look at the actual sequence of Mahadashas, or the sequence of nakshatras after the birth nakshatra, that'll give you some really strong clues for the destiny of the person. So even if the planet is really well placed, it'll protect the person. That's
Yeah, even a strong malefic is better than a weak
yeah,
malefic. I
yeah,
agree with you. Yeah.
yeah. But I think that from what I've seen, I've and as I've said, I've seen this, and again, we can also look at the nakshatras and the navamsha if you want to as well. But basically, if you look at that pattern, you'll see, and I've seen that pattern repeated again and again and again. It's not so much how strong the
Can you
chart
give us an
is.
example, for example, in a practical
Well,
application? Maybe people will
well,
know.
you can even look at Adolf Hitler's chart. I think Adolf had a Mula moon, if I recall it correctly. Let me see if I can pull up his chart just for a second.
I don't remember.
Let me see. It's one of my favorite teaching charts because it's so obvious. It's such an obvious chart. It's not that I like the guy. It's just it's a really
Yeah.
easy. It's a really easy read. Hold on a second. All right. Can you see this chart?
Yes.
All right. Now, we rather have North Indian or South
Yeah, the exalted Mars, yeah. Sun and Mars with it. Yeah.
Indian? All right. So
Fierce chart, very fierce.
yeah. So he's got his moon starts in where's our moon up here? His moon starts in
Purvashada, that's for declaring
Purvashada,
war.
which is a Venus ruler.
Purvashada is very aggressive.
Yeah, yeah,
It's for declaring war, right? One of the
yep, yep.
characteristics.
Okay. So after Purvashada, we have Uttarashada, which is the sun rule Mahadasha, and it goes to his son. So his father was a very difficult, very cruel man. Okay, that's one of the stories about Hitler. Then it goes to Moon Mahadasha and his moon. So let's go back to his birth. Let's go back to his Mahadashas just quickly. I'm just going to go to one level for simplicity's sake. All right, that's not Adolf's current. Adolf was born a long time ago. Hold on a second. All right. So he started his son Mahadasha when he was 18 years old. That was when he left his household. Actually, that was when he became, I guess he entered the army. His moon Mahadasha was in his 20s, and that was actually when he tried to become an artist, if I recall that period. 1923, his Mars
Like Ravana, he had some good qualities. Unfortunately, very wrong.
Yeah. And in 1923, he enters his Mars Mahadasha, and his Mars is in its own sign, which is terrific, but it's also in Dhanishtha. So it's also reflective of Dhanishtha Nakshatra. So Dhanishtha is very powerful. It's like a drum. That's the symbolism behind Dhanishtha. So that's going to give like the drum beat. He was essentially, it was the second best
Boisterous, right?
Yeah.
The voice like this and the microphones.
Yep. And he was, and many people don't remember this about Hitler, but his book was the best-selling book in history after the Bible, which is
oh my God,
which is up until that point, which is I think the Rolling books are probably better sellers than that now. But I'm just, but basically he had this. So he had that Moon Jupiter conjunction, which makes an author, right? That's almost a stereotypical combination. But also he enters this Dhanishtha Mahadasha, and this Dhanishtha Mahadasha is for defeating enemies. It's for triumph. It's for rise in life.
Mars. It's Mars.
It's Mars. It's one of the wealth nakshatras.
Yeah, the wealthiest, they say.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
have you noticed that's true? Have you noticed planets in Dhanishtha giving a lot of money?
Yep.
Like, absolutely. For example, which one have you noticed in your research?
Essentially, I can tell you Hitler, at least for one. Okay, during this Mars Mahadasha, made a lot of money. He was actually a very rich man. I can personalize it. My Dhanishtha and Nakshatras, Rahu's in Dhanishtha. I tend to make more money. I tend to make more money during Rahu Mahadashas than almost any others. So I'll give you those two examples.
Yes, definitely.
But and then all of a sudden he has this Sadabhishak Nakshatra with Rahu. So his Rahu's in the ninth house. What's wrong with Rahu in the ninth house? It's perfect.
Fame.
Rahu's in
kind of in its own sign in
and it's in Punarvasa.
I mean in Kumbha.
Yeah. And it's in Punarvasa Nakshatra. What's the story behind Varuna, the ruler of Nakshatra?
Oh, it's in Gemini, which is a great place for Rahu.
Yeah. But this gets back to your story. What happened to Varuna, the ruler of the ruler assigned to Sadabhishak? He got deposed by Indra. Okay, So he entered his Rahu Mahadasha over here. This is his sequence. Rahu gave him great triumphs in the beginning of it, right? But it's never going to let him hold on to power because Varuna couldn't. Okay, so this would be the nakshatra in which he would become deposed. If you just look at that, and there were a lot of other.
Theoretically, some people think he was alive after the war. I don't know. But yeah, still deposed.
Yeah, but he was thrown out of power. I mean,
Yeah, he didn't have that official role anymore.
Yep. So around 1945, that was quote unquote the end of Nazi Germany, unless you want to go to Argentina, let's say. But
Right.
basically, this Rahu Mahadasha, it ended. So in 1948, he enters this Jupiter Mahadasha, and that also transitions. But I think overall, if you look at this, you can kind of see the pattern of where the life transpired to or moved to. If you follow that sequence. And again, this is just one example, but I think it's a very compelling one. You know, so I just want to illustrate it with that. I'm going to take the screen. Let's just turn off the screen now. Okay. So I could probably put I could probably pull up a bunch of charts and show the same thing, but that's like I said, that's really one of the reasons I want to show that was because it was such an obvious.
Yeah, these are great examples on how it works. Yes.
Yeah. So
anything else you want to add about before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's about it.
So definitely the planets will change a lot depending on their nakshatra, right? And their archetypes and lords, etc. So don't give up, because even if the Mahadasha is not great, through the Vedic remedies, you can change those thought forms that come from the planets and from the planets ruling your dasha in minor periods, which are called bhukti, etc. So Vedic astrology is the only thing I know where you can actually fix your karma, because karma is created by your thoughts, right, Gary? Right. So it's nice to remember to people, I think, that there's no life sentence. A bad planet can be fixed.
Yep, exactly.
To a great extent, at least 20% through fire rituals. And also, it's important to remember that no day is the same. For example, every day is ruled by a planet, and maybe during that same Mahadasha with the same bhukti, the same everything, the next day will be ruled by a favorable planet. And you have a chance to act on those energies and make the best of them. And so you're not destined to have the dasha, the losing planet, if you want to call it that. But actually all planets teach us great things, and they're just our friends.
Yep, exactly. And I think that the big lesson the chart teaches us is how to navigate our karma. So it's the most successful and maybe the least painful, because the more pain you have, the more you attach to pain, and so that attachment will lead to reincarnation anyway.
Yeah, and this identification with pain is very much part of our Kali Yuga, and we get lost in it. Yeah, it's so difficult to get out of it. Yes,
exactly. All right, Lalitha.
All right, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Same here, Lalitha. Thank you very much.
Very interesting. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.